The morning mist clung to the valley floor like a protective blanket, hiding the truth that would soon shatter the confidence of military commanders hundreds of miles away. Sarah Martinez adjusted her rifle scope for the third time, her weathered hands steady despite the knowledge that she was about to become the thin line between life and death for 22 soldiers who didn't even know she existed. The radio crackled with static as Command's voice cut through the early dawn silence. Eagle's Nest. This is Base Command. Valley reconnaissance shows 0 hostile activity. Proceed with standard patrol formation. Sarah pressed her lips together in frustration. From her elevated position on the rocky outcrop overlooking the narrow mountain pass, she could see what the satellite imagery and drone surveillance had missed. The morning sun was just beginning to burn off the mist, revealing the glint of metal hidden among the boulders and scrub brush below. She counted at least 15 positions, maybe more, all perfectly positioned for an ambush. Her fingers found the radio transmitter clipped to her tactical vest. Base Command, this is Mountain Watch. I have visual on multiple hostile positions in the valley. Recommend immediate route change for patrol unit. The response came back sharp and dismissive. Mountain Watch. Satellite shows clear passage. Maintain observation only. Do not engage unless directly threatened. Sarah's jaw tightened. She had been watching this valley for 3 months, learning every shadow, every rock formation, every game trail that wound through the dense vegetation. The intelligence reports were wrong, but convincing headquarters would take time that the approaching patrol didn't have. Through her binoculars, she watched Lieutenant Davis lead his squad of 22 soldiers down the winding mountain path toward what would certainly become a killing field. Davis was young, maybe 25, with the kind of confidence that came from surviving 2 previous deployments. His men trusted him completely, just as he trusted the intelligence that told him the valley was secure. Sarah had earned her position through 15 years of military service before transitioning to civilian contract work. Her reputation for accuracy and tactical awareness had made her the perfect choice for the isolated observation post. But watching didn't feel like enough when she could see disaster approaching with mathematical certainty. The enemy fighters had chosen their positions with deadly precision. The valley narrowed at its center, creating a natural bottleneck where the patrol would be forced to bunch together. Steep walls on both sides would make escape nearly impossible once the shooting started. It was a textbook ambush setup, and Davis's squad was walking straight into it. Mountain Watch to patrol leader, Sarah transmitted, switching to the patrol's frequency. Lieutenant Davis, this is Sarah Martinez at Observation Post 7. You have hostiles waiting in the valley. Do not proceed. Davis's voice came back, confused but alert. Mountain Watch, we weren't notified of any observer assets in this sector. Can you verify your position and authority? Sarah cursed under her breath. Military bureaucracy would get these young soldiers killed while forms were being processed and authorizations confirmed. She watched through her scope as the first enemy fighter adjusted his position, clearly tracking the approaching patrol through his own sights. Davis, forget the paperwork. In about 2 minutes, you're going to walk into an ambush that will kill every one of your men. Take your squad up the Eastern Ridge Trail instead. There was a long pause before Davis responded. Mountain Watch, I need verification of your identity and mission parameters before I can alter our assigned route. Sarah watched in growing frustration as the patrol continued their steady advance toward certain death. The enemy fighters were now clearly visible to her experienced eye. At least 18 of them spread across the valley floor and lower slopes. They had automatic weapons, rocket-propelled grenades, and the patience of hunters who knew their prey was approaching. She tried one more time with Base Command. Command, this is Mountain Watch requesting immediate extraction order for Valley Patrol. I have positive identification of hostile force in ambush position. Mountain Watch, you are not authorized to direct patrol movements. Maintain observation and report only. The radio fell silent, leaving Sarah alone with an impossible decision. Her orders were clear. Observe and report. Do not engage unless directly threatened. But watching 22 soldiers die when she had the skill and position to prevent it went against everything she believed in. Through her scope, she could see the lead enemy fighter's finger moving toward his trigger. The patrol was now less than 300 meters from the kill zone. In another minute, it would be too late for anyone to help them. Sarah checked her ammunition count. 60 rounds for her precision rifle, plus 400 more for the automatic weapon she had insisted on bringing despite command's protests. Her position gave her clear lines of sight to most of the enemy positions, though engaging would mean revealing herself and drawing their attention. The mathematics of the situation were brutal but simple. 18 enemy fighters against 1 observer, or 18 fighters against 22 unsuspecting soldiers. The odds were terrible either way, but at least she knew what she was walking into. Davis and his men had no idea what was waiting for them. They trusted their intelligence, their commanders, and their training. None of those things would save them from the trap they were about to enter. Sarah's decision crystallized in that moment of perfect clarity that comes before action. She had sworn an oath to protect American soldiers, and that oath didn't come with exceptions for inconvenient orders or bureaucratic protocols. "Lieutenant Davis," she transmitted one final time. "Whatever happens in the next few minutes, keep your men moving and get to cover. There are at least 18 hostiles waiting for you, and I'm about to make them very angry." Before Davis could respond, Sarah settled into her shooting position and acquired her first target. The enemy fighter was approximately 400 meters away, partially concealed behind a boulder, but clearly visible through her high-powered scope. She controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth precision of thousands of hours of training. The rifle's crack echoed across the valley like thunder, and the first enemy fighter dropped instantly. The ambush was broken before it could begin, but now Sarah had revealed her position to 17 very angry fighters who would do everything possible to kill her. She was already moving to her next target when the enemy forces realized they were under attack from an unexpected direction. Confusion spread through their ranks as they tried to locate the source of the incoming fire while simultaneously engaging the patrol they had been waiting to ambush. Davis, to his credit, reacted instantly when the shooting started. His training took over, and he began moving his squad toward the cover of the eastern ridge just as Sarah had suggested. But they were still exposed, still vulnerable, and still dependent on one woman with a rifle to keep them alive long enough to reach safety. Sarah's second shot took down the fighter manning a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The weapon tumbled from his hands and rolled down the slope, denying the enemy their most dangerous asset. But return fire was already starting to spark off the rocks around her position as the remaining fighters began to zero in on her location. The battle for the valley had begun, and 22 lives hung in the balance. Sarah Martinez, acting against direct orders but in accordance with her deepest convictions, had just started a fight she might not be able to finish. But as she acquired her third target and felt the familiar rhythm of combat settle over her, she knew there had been no other choice. The enemy fighters were now fully engaged, their carefully planned ambush turned into a chaotic firefight. Some were still trying to target the patrol, while others were desperately seeking cover from Sarah's increasingly accurate rifle fire. The confusion was working in favor of the American forces, but it wouldn't last long. Davis's voice crackled over the radio, tight with adrenaline, but still professional. "Mountain Watch, we're moving to cover. Whatever you're doing up there, keep it up." Sarah chambered another round and searched for her next target. The real fight was just beginning, and she had 57 shots left to keep 22 soldiers alive. The morning sun was now fully up, burning away the last of the protective mist and revealing the true scope of what she had chosen to face alone. Through her scope, she could see more enemy fighters moving through the rocks, trying to flank her position while maintaining pressure on the patrol. They were well-trained and disciplined, recovering quickly from the shock of her initial assault. This was going to be a long morning, and there was no guarantee any of them would see the end of it. But Sarah Martinez had made her choice, and she was prepared to live or die by the consequences. The valley that command had declared safe was about to become the scene of one of the most remarkable acts of heroism in modern military history. The enemy's counterattack came faster than Sarah had expected. Within minutes of her first shot, automatic weapons fire was chewing up the rocky outcrop around her position. Fragments of stone and metal filled the air as bullets ricocheted off the granite surfaces, sending deadly shrapnel in all directions. Sarah rolled behind a larger boulder as a burst of machine gun fire swept across her previous position. The enemy fighters had quickly identified the general area of her shots and were now laying down suppressive fire while their comrades maneuvered for better positions. She counted at least 3 different weapons systems firing at her location, which meant the enemy was more organized and better equipped than initial intelligence had suggested. Through her radio earpiece, she could hear Davis coordinating his squad's movement toward the eastern ridge. Alpha Team, maintain covering fire on the southern slope. Bravo Team, advance by bounds toward the tree line. Charlie Team, watch for flanking movement from the north. The lieutenant was handling the situation well, but Sarah could see through her binoculars that his men were still exposed and vulnerable. 2 of the soldiers had already been hit by enemy fire, though both appeared to be mobile and fighting. The squad's medic was working frantically to treat wounded while maintaining defensive fire. Sarah waited for a lull in the incoming fire before exposing herself long enough to acquire another target. A fighter armed with what appeared to be a light machine gun was setting up a position that would give him a clear field of fire on the retreating patrol. Sarah's 4th shot sent him tumbling backward before he could bring his weapon to bear. The enemy response was immediate and violent. Rocket-propelled grenades began impacting around her position, sending up clouds of dust and debris that made target acquisition nearly impossible. Sarah realized the fighters were using coordinated tactics, with some providing suppressive fire while others moved to better positions. "Mountain Watch, we need immediate support," Davis transmitted, his voice strained with the effort of combat leadership. "We have multiple wounded and are taking heavy fire from at least 3 directions." Sarah keyed her radio while reloading. "Hold your position and maintain covering fire. I'm going to try to take some pressure off you." She had identified the enemy's command structure during the initial exchange of fire. One fighter, positioned in a natural rock shelter about 500 meters away, appeared to be coordinating the attack through hand signals and radio communications. Taking him out might disrupt their tactical coordination long enough for Davis's squad to reach better cover. The shot would be difficult under the best circumstances. At 500 meters, with enemy fire incoming and limited time to aim, it would require every bit of skill Sarah had developed over her long military career. She controlled her breathing, found her natural pause between heartbeats, and squeezed the trigger with mechanical precision. The enemy commander dropped instantly, and the immediate effect on his fighters was obvious. The coordinated suppressive fire became sporadic and disorganized as individual fighters lost contact with their tactical leader. Sarah used the momentary confusion to relocate to a different firing position, knowing the enemy would have marked her previous location. From her new position, she could see that Davis had managed to move most of his squad to better cover among the trees on the eastern slope. But 3 soldiers were still pinned down in the open, unable to move without exposing themselves to deadly crossfire from enemy positions on both flanks. Sarah switched to her automatic rifle, knowing she would need volume of fire rather than precision for her next action. The 3 stranded soldiers were Sergeant Miller, Corporal Rodriguez, and Private Jackson, all young men with families waiting for them back home. Sarah had read their personnel files during her weeks of observation, part of her preparation for exactly this type of situation. "Miller, this is Mountain Watch," she transmitted on the patrol frequency. "When I open fire, you and your men move fast to the tree line. I'll keep the enemy's heads down, but you'll only have about 30 seconds. "Copy, Mountain Watch. We're ready." Sarah opened fire with sustained bursts, walking her rounds across the enemy positions that were pinning down the three soldiers. The automatic weapon bucked against her shoulder as she sent streams of ammunition toward targets she could barely see through the dust and smoke. Her fire wasn't particularly accurate at this range, but it was forcing the enemy fighters to take cover instead of shooting at the escaping soldiers. Through her peripheral vision, she watched Miller, Rodriguez, and Jackson sprint across the open ground toward the safety of the trees. Rodriguez stumbled and went down halfway across, but Miller and Jackson grabbed him and helped him continue toward cover. All three made it to the tree line just as Sarah's ammunition ran low, but her sustained automatic fire had given the enemy time to pinpoint her new position. Incoming rounds were now impacting dangerously close to her location, and she could hear the distinctive whistle of another rocket-propelled grenade incoming. Sarah threw herself flat against the rocky ground as the explosion sent fragments of metal and stone whistling overhead. When the debris stopped falling, she realized her automatic weapon had been damaged by shrapnel. The barrel was bent, and the firing mechanism appeared to be jammed beyond field repair. She was back to her precision rifle and whatever ammunition remained for it. Sarah counted her remaining rounds. 43 left in her magazines, plus whatever was still in the weapon itself. The mathematics were becoming increasingly unfavorable, especially since the enemy fighters were now fully alert to her presence and capabilities. "Mountain Watch, this is Base Command," her radio suddenly crackled to life. "We're showing weapons fire in your sector. Report your status." Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of the transmission. After 20 minutes of sustained combat, Command was just now noticing that something might be wrong. "Base Command. I am currently engaged with approximately 15 hostile fighters, while providing cover for a patrol unit under your command. Situation is critical. Mountain Watch. You are not authorized to engage hostile forces. Break contact immediately and return to observation only." Negative, Command. Breaking contact now would result in casualties among friendly forces. I will maintain engagement until patrol unit reaches safety. There was a long pause before Command responded. "Mountain Watch, you are acting outside your authority. Cease fire immediately or face disciplinary action." Sarah switched off her radio. She had more important things to worry about than bureaucratic threats from officers who were sitting safely in air-conditioned command centers hundreds of miles away. The young soldiers fighting for their lives in the valley below deserved better than abandonment for the sake of paperwork and protocol. Through her scope, she could see that the enemy fighters were regrouping after the loss of their commander. A new leader had emerged, and they were beginning to coordinate their movements again. Several fighters were moving to flank the patrol's new position, while others maintained pressure from the front. Davis's voice came over the tactical frequency. "Mountain Watch, we're in defensive positions but still taking casualties. Thompson and Williams are down, and our medic is running low on supplies. How much longer can you keep them off us?" Sarah surveyed the tactical situation with the cold calculation of a professional soldier. She had been fighting for nearly 30 minutes, and the enemy force was still largely intact. Her ammunition was running low, her automatic weapon was destroyed, and she was now facing a coordinated assault from fighters who knew exactly where she was positioned. The honest answer to Davis's question was that she probably couldn't keep them off much longer. But honesty wasn't what 22 trapped soldiers needed to hear from their only source of support. "Hold your positions, Lieutenant. Cavalry's coming." It wasn't exactly a lie. Sarah could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the north, which meant Command had finally decided to take the situation seriously. But the helicopters were still minutes away, and she would have to hold the enemy force alone until they arrived. Sarah acquired her next target, a fighter who was moving through the rocks toward a position that would give him a clear shot at the patrol's medic. The soldier was trying to treat wounded men while under fire, displaying exactly the kind of courage and dedication that made Sarah's own choice inevitable. Her shot took the enemy fighter center mass at 400 meters, and he dropped without firing a round. But return fire was immediate and accurate, forcing Sarah to keep moving between positions to avoid the increasingly precise incoming rounds. The helicopters were getting closer, but so was the enemy's flanking movement. Sarah could see fighters moving through the dead ground on both sides of her position, trying to get close enough for grenades or close-quarters combat. She was running out of time, ammunition, and options. But she still had 41 rounds left, and 22 American soldiers were counting on her to make every one of them count. Sarah Martinez had started this fight to save lives, and she was prepared to finish it the same way, regardless of what it cost her personally. The sound of rotor blades was now clearly audible over the gunfire, and Sarah allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. Help was finally coming for Davis and his men. Now she just had to stay alive long enough to see them safely evacuated. The first helicopter appeared over the northern ridge like an avenging angel, its door-mounted machine guns already spinning up for action. Sarah felt a surge of relief that was immediately tempered by the realization that the enemy fighters would now turn their desperate fury toward the arriving aircraft. Rescue flight. "This is Mountain Watch," Sarah transmitted as she acquired another target through her scope. "Multiple hostiles in the valley floor and eastern slopes. Friendlies are marked with green smoke on the eastern ridge." "Copy, Mountain Watch. We see your position and the friendly marker. Keep your heads down while we clear the area." The helicopter's machine guns opened fire with a devastating roar that echoed off the valley walls. Streams of tracer rounds lit up the morning air as the gunners walked their fire across the enemy positions. The effect was immediate and dramatic as fighters who had been confidently advancing suddenly found themselves exposed to aerial attack. But the enemy force was more resilient than Sarah had hoped. Instead of breaking and running, they quickly adapted to the new threat. Several fighters began engaging the helicopters with automatic weapons fire, while others continued their assault on the patrol's position. Most troubling of all, Sarah spotted one fighter moving toward a concealed position with what appeared to be a shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missile. "Rescue flight, you have a missile threat moving to your 3 o'clock. Single fighter with a Stinger-type weapon." Sarah was already lining up her shot as she transmitted the warning. The enemy fighter was approximately 300 meters away, partially concealed behind a fallen tree as he prepared to engage the lead helicopter. Through her scope, Sarah could see him raising the missile launcher to his shoulder. Her shot took him in the upper chest just as his finger found the trigger. The missile fired wild, streaking harmlessly into the sky before detonating against the valley wall in a shower of rock and flame. The fighter collapsed backward, the launcher tumbling from his hands. "Good shooting, Mountain Watch. Threat neutralized." But Sarah's position was now completely compromised. Every enemy fighter in the valley had seen her muzzle flash and the direction of her shot. Automatic weapons fire began converging on her location with deadly accuracy, forcing her to abandon her carefully chosen shooting position. Sarah rolled behind the largest boulder she could find as bullets sparked and whined off the rocky surfaces around her. Fragments of stone cut her face and hands as she pressed herself flat against the ground, trying to make herself as small a target as possible. The helicopters continued their attack runs, but the enemy fighters were now using Sarah's position as cover. They knew the aircraft couldn't fire in her direction without risking hitting her, so they clustered near her rocky outcrop while engaging the helicopters and the patrol simultaneously. Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear Davis coordinating the evacuation of his wounded soldiers. "Casualty evacuation in progress. We need 2 more minutes to get the wounded loaded." 2 minutes might as well have been 2 hours given Sarah's current situation. She was effectively pinned down by at least 6 enemy fighters who were close enough to hear their movement through the rocks. Her ammunition count was down to 34 rounds, and she had no way to reach a better position without exposing herself to certain death. "Mountain Watch, this is Rescue Leader. The helicopter pilot's voice crackled in her earpiece. "We need you to mark your exact position so we can provide close support." Sarah looked around desperately for some way to signal her location without revealing herself to the enemy fighters. Her signal flares were in her pack, but reaching them would require movement that would draw immediate fire. Then she remembered the small mirror she carried for emergency signaling. Keeping as low as possible, Sarah angled the mirror to catch the morning sunlight and reflect it toward the helicopter. The pilot's response was immediate. "I see your signal. Danger close fire mission coming in 30 seconds. Stay down." The helicopter's rockets impacted just 50 meters from Sarah's position, sending a shock wave that rattled her teeth and filled the air with deadly fragments. But the attack had achieved its purpose, forcing the enemy fighters to seek cover farther from her position and giving her room to maneuver. Sarah used the momentary confusion to relocate to a position that offered both better cover and improved fields of fire. From her new location, she could see that several enemy fighters were now retreating toward the western end of the valley, apparently deciding that the combination of air support and accurate sniper fire was more than they were prepared to face. But a hard core of fighters remained, determined to inflict maximum casualties before withdrawing. Sarah could see them setting up what appeared to be a final desperate assault on the patrol's position, probably hoping to overrun the American forces before the helicopters could intervene effectively. "Lieutenant Davis, you have approximately 8 hostiles moving toward your position from the south. They're using the stream bed for concealment." "Copy, Mountain Watch. We see movement in the stream bed. Can you engage?" Sarah was already tracking the lead fighter through her scope when she heard the distinctive sound of Davis's squad laying down suppressive fire. The young lieutenant had learned quickly during the firefight, and his men were now fighting with the coordinated precision of seasoned veterans. Sarah's shot took down the lead enemy fighter just as he emerged from the stream bed with a grenade in his hand. The explosive device tumbled from his grasp and rolled harmlessly down the slope before detonating against a boulder. The remaining fighters hesitated, unsure whether to continue their assault or retreat to better positions. That moment of hesitation was all the helicopters needed. Both aircraft opened fire simultaneously, catching the exposed enemy fighters in a devastating crossfire that ended their assault before it could properly begin. The few surviving fighters finally broke and ran, disappearing into the rough terrain at the western end of the valley. "Rescue leader to all units. Valley is secure. Beginning casualty evacuation now." Sarah slumped against her boulder as the adrenaline that had sustained her through 45 minutes of combat began to fade. Her hands were shaking as she safeguarded her rifle, and she was surprised to discover that she had been hit by shrapnel in at least 3 places without noticing it during the fight. Through her binoculars, she watched the helicopters landing near Davis's position while the lieutenant's men provided security. The wounded soldiers were quickly loaded aboard the aircraft, with the most seriously injured receiving immediate medical attention from the flight medics. Davis himself walked over to one of the helicopters and began speaking urgently with the pilot, gesturing toward Sarah's position on the rocky outcrop. After a brief conversation, the pilot nodded and began maneuvering his aircraft toward her location. Sarah's radio crackled to life. "Mountain Watch, this is Lieutenant Davis. I understand you're the guardian angel who kept my men alive today. We're coming to get you." "Negative, Lieutenant. I can extract myself. Get your wounded to medical attention." "That's not happening, ma'am. We don't leave our people behind, especially people who risked everything to save us." The helicopter settled onto a relatively flat area, about 50 meters from Sarah's position. Davis and 2 of his men dismounted and began making their way carefully through the rocks toward her location, their weapons ready in case any enemy fighters had remained hidden. When Davis reached her position, Sarah was surprised to see that he was younger than she had expected, probably no more than 24 or 25. But his eyes held the steady confidence of a natural leader, and his men clearly trusted him completely. "Sarah Martinez?" he asked, extending his hand. "I'm Lieutenant James Davis. I owe you the lives of 22 soldiers, including my own." Sarah shook his hand, noting the firm grip and direct gaze. "Just doing my job, Lieutenant." "No, ma'am, you were doing a lot more than your job. I heard your radio traffic with command. You went against direct orders to save us." As they made their way toward the waiting helicopter, Davis continued talking. "My men wanted me to tell you something. Every one of them volunteered to come get you, even the wounded ones. That's the kind of loyalty you earn when you put your life on the line for others." The helicopter ride back to base was largely silent, with Sarah staring out at the valley that had nearly become a graveyard for 22 young Americans. She thought about the radio calls from command, the bureaucratic priorities that would have sacrificed lives for protocol, and the simple moral equation that had driven her to action. When they landed at the forward operating base, Sarah was surprised to find a crowd of soldiers waiting for them. Word of the firefight had spread quickly through the military communications network, and everyone wanted to see the woman who had single-handedly held off an entire enemy force. But what struck Sarah most was the sight of the wounded soldiers from Davis's patrol. Despite their injuries, they had all insisted on being there when she arrived. Thompson, who had taken shrapnel in his leg, was leaning heavily on crutches. Williams, with his left arm in a sling, stood at attention as best he could manage. Sergeant Miller, whom Sarah had helped escape from the killing zone, stepped forward and rendered a perfect salute. "Ma'am, on behalf of the men of 2nd Squad, thank you for bringing us home." Sarah returned the salute, feeling the weight of what had happened settling on her shoulders. She had fired exactly 60 shots during the engagement, each one aimed with the precision that came from years of training and the motivation that came from seeing young soldiers in mortal danger. Later, during the official debriefing, she would learn that her actions had eliminated or wounded 14 enemy fighters and disrupted an ambush that would certainly have resulted in heavy American casualties. Command's after-action report would praise her exceptional marksmanship and tactical awareness under extreme combat conditions. But what mattered most to Sarah was standing right in front of her, 22 soldiers who would be going home to their families because one person had refused to follow orders that would have gotten them killed. The valley that command had declared safe was now truly secure, but not because of superior intelligence or overwhelming firepower. It was secure because sometimes, when the bureaucracy fails and the intelligence is wrong, individual courage can bridge the gap between survival and catastrophe. Sarah Martinez had proven that 60 rounds, placed with precision and fired with purpose, could indeed keep 22 soldiers alive. More importantly, she had proven that the oath to protect American forces doesn't come with exceptions for inconvenient orders or comfortable positions. As she walked toward the debriefing room, Sarah could hear Davis talking to his men about the lessons learned from their valley patrol. The lieutenant was already planning how to incorporate the experience into their future operations, how to better prepare for the unexpected, and how to never again rely entirely on intelligence reports that might be fatally flawed. The young soldiers would carry the memory of that morning for the rest of their lives, not just as survivors of a deadly ambush, but as witnesses to what happens when training, courage, and moral conviction combine in a single moment of decision. They had seen proof that one person, in the right place at the right time with the right skills, could change everything. For Sarah Martinez, the woman who had defied command to save 22 lives with 60 perfectly placed shots, the morning in the valley would become the defining moment of her career. She had faced the choice between following orders and following her conscience, and she had chosen to act on the principle that protecting American soldiers was more important than protecting herself from bureaucratic consequences. The valley held no threat now, but its lesson would echo through military training centers and tactical academies for years to come. Sometimes the greatest victories are won not by those who follow orders, but by those who have the courage to do what's right when orders are wrong.